This content is brought to you by iTrust Capital, which is a great platform that allows you to easily invest in crypto without worrying about taxes or fees. iTrust Capital allows you to invest in crypto through an individual retirement account or IRA. IRAs are tax sheltered accounts, which means all of your crypto is tax free and can even grow tax free over time. The process of signing up with iTrust Capital is very easy. They have a mobile app. They have 25 plus cryptocurrencies. They have full support, a dedicated team ready to help you. And it is free. And once again, 100% free to sign up with iTrust Capital. There are no hidden fees and there's no monthly subscription or membership. They also have great security. They utilize Coinbase custody for all their custodial services. So you don't have to worry. It is institutional grade crypto custody that they are using. This is a great platform. Once again, it is free to sign up. So visit the link in the description and go check it out. If you sign up with my link, you get a $100 funding bonus. So once again, check the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Charles Hoskinson, who's the founder of Cardano. Charles, great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be back on. How have you been?
I've been well, and since we last spoke, there's been a lot of updates around Cardano, and full disclosure, I'm an ADA token holder, so I'm a big fan, of course, and I would love to start with the news about Wave Financial adding a ADA yield fund or launching an ADA yield fund, about $100 million. Can you tell us about that and the goal there?
So Wave is a RIA in the United States, and they do a lot of different things across the board. They have whiskey funds where they buy whiskey barrels, age them, and sell them, and they make great returns on that. They do all kinds of things involved with cryptocurrency trading. They play options markets, and not just for Cardano, they do it across the spectrum. So we've had a relationship with Wave for quite some time, for a variety of different things. And the biggest relationship so far is the C Fund, where we had them set up the C Fund. We kept an arm's length distance. We invested as LPs, and then they went off and invested in various different things in the Cardano ecosystem. But there's kind of two different sides to the Cardano ecosystem. There's the project capital, and that's either Catalyst or C Fund or whatever. And then the other side is a lot of these things require liquidity. They require some sort of TVL. And in both cases, there are great returns that can be made. And so we try to stay somewhat neutral and objective. And so what we do is we just outsource that to third parties, and we let them take care of it and think about it. And hopefully they make more money than they lose. And it all evens out in the end. So that's just an example of one of the several things that Wave has announced recently. And they've been exploring a litany of different products and interesting things, and, whether it be covered calls and options, or liquidity for this, that, and the other, or investment funds for stuff in Africa. One thing I'm very excited about is the prospect of potentially setting up a microfinance fund. We're not quite there yet, but it's something we've been talking about for the second half of the year. Because I think not only are there great returns with that in a vehicle, but there's a lot of cool crypto stuff that can be done with it. So you always have to work with regulated partners in this respect. And that's basically what Wave's role is. And we kind of think about it from a technology perspective and a market access perspective and these types of things.
That's exciting. And I know it's about $100 million. Are there plans to, in the future, if needed, to raise additional capital to add to that?
No, that's just our capital. So there's really not much to add to that, but I suspect others eventually will come in. But, you let these things cook for a while, and then eventually they become either self-sustaining and attractive, or you have to kind of pivot, do something else. Prior to the big crypto crash, we were doing quite well with the C Fund. I think our returns were over 500%. So we were quite happy about that. Although I haven't gotten the latest returns, so I suspect the current markets aren't as good in that respect.
So on that note, do you feel we're in crypto winter, heading to a deep bear market a la 2018, 2019?
We could potentially be headed in that direction. I mean, everything is in free fall. It's, it's easy to say, oh, look at how bad crypto is doing. I mean, Nasdaq's down over 30%, 18% on the S&P. Tech stocks in particular are just getting brutalized. Most of the altcoins are 70 to 80% lower than their all-time high. And the question is, where's the floor? So if you recall with Cardano, the floor last time around was 2.5 cents. It was pretty horrible. And Bitcoin went all the way down to $4,000 from its all-time high of 20,000. And it just kind of stuck there for a while. And it certainly could happen, but these are very different markets than the markets in 2018, 2019. There's a significantly larger population of people and more developed instruments, more developed protocols, a lot more liquidity. Coinbase, for example, is publicly traded now. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff now that just didn't exist then. The other thing is there's just more people. There's probably more than 100 million people that are in the cryptocurrency spaces as a whole, and they're kind of floating around and doing things, and a lot of cool and interesting projects, a lot of Fortune 500 companies that are entering in. The NFT space in particular seems to have some durability. I'm a bit surprised about that, but it has, and it keeps going and keeps growing. And so that's brought a lot of artists in, that's brought a lot of third parties in who normally wouldn't be in crypto and weren't in crypto in 2018. So given those facts and circumstances, I don't think we'll see as big and vicious of a bottom as we saw in 2018. But, all things considered, there's a lot of puzzling market behavior. For example, I thought for sure that crypto would be countercyclic, in that if the equity markets fell and the bond markets fell and commodity prices were high, that crypto would track that, and it actually would be high with the commodities. It wouldn't fall with the tech stocks. But it's been the opposite, where when the tech stocks collapse, crypto has also fallen. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, because you figure crypto is like the safe harbor. It's the place you flee when your normal portfolios aren't looking so good. So part of that could be that we just had such a bubble in 2021, and there was so much speculation that there had to be some sell-off and some heat escaping the system for crypto to normalize, and it's looking for a new bottom. And part of that could be that people were divesting to recover losses or pay taxes or other such things, and there was just a cascade. And certainly there's black swan events like the fall of Luna.
Sure.
In hindsight, it's totally predictable, but the problem is, even if it's going to happen, it's a question of when. And these things can linger on and on and on and on and on for years to decades potentially. I mean, there's this old saying, catching a falling knife, so it is what it is. So, but they're puzzling markets to me, and that's why I'm not a trader. I stay out of all that stuff. If I start doing trading, it's like I'm going to lose all my money very, very quickly. I just built stuff, and it's a lot more sanguine than what we deal with when dealing with the daily chaos of the market.
So, part of what you mentioned there, is it the double-edged sword of institutional money that, they're going to de-risk heavily because they're all these markets. And like you said, some of it's tax selling and so forth. And I know you had some thoughts you recently shared about VCs and their role in the crypto market.
Yeah, the institutional divestment. So institutions by and large are treating crypto as an exotic high risk asset with high returns. And so when the markets collapse, what they tend to do is they tend to divest their high risk assets and just turtle up in predictable assets. So we saw billions, if not tens of billions of dollars of Bitcoin and other assets be divested by institutional investors over a 30-day period. And they moved very quickly and very systematically about it. And so that certainly did take some of the oomph out of the step. The other problem with the VC coins, like the collapse of Luna, really exposed this. I tweeted a list of all the different people that we know of who invested in Luna. And it's like the who's who of the VC side of things. And the problem is they get sweetheart deals and they get in very early. And so their price points are very different from the price points of the retail investors that come in. And, they can sell at 5 cents and still make a great profit, whereas others maybe have to sell at $1 or something like that for whatever the currency is. And so when you have reality like that, and you have fiduciary responsibilities and LPs you have to take care of, then, they're not really going to do things in the long term. They're going to do things to maximize short-term gain. And that's maximizing short-term gain oftentimes on the back of retail investors. Also, it forces you to have tokenomics where you have outsized pre-mines. Back when I was growing up, 20% pre-mine was like pushing the limit. You
Sure.
can do that now. Is like 50%, 60%, 70%. We use it for our community fund. Yay. And they say that type of stuff. And there's all kinds of craziness that's going around, and there's loose money. They're paying ridiculous wages. Some people are getting $3, $5, $6, $7 million to be a Solidity developer. Absolutely crazy vesting packages. Tokens are very, very loose right now, and so the VCs are a contributor to that, but by no means are the only contributor.
Now, is there a solution to that, or is that just a free market element, right? We can't really control it, but
we saw the same thing with the .com boom and bust. These VCs would come in and give outsized, ridiculous valuations to things, and it was a race to the top. And generally what happens is after a collapse, it shakes things out. And then you have much more informed, better investors that come in. And there are cycles as well. And, some people just love the irrationality. Other people stay out. So I think it'll organically resolve itself. It's just going to take a little bit of time for the market to clear. Certainly there's going to be regulation that does come and enter the marketplace. In fact, I'm going to DC next week, and we'll talk to a lot of lawmakers and a lot of think tanks and lobby groups and so forth, and try to get a lay of the land of what's coming. Because it's not a question of, well, will regulation come? There will be regulation. It's just a question of how pervasive and what assets are covered. The common wisdom right now is something involving stable coins will pass. But above and beyond that, there's still open questions about whether right now there's this, is it a commodity by default and maybe it becomes a security, or is it a security by default and maybe it becomes a commodity? Mm-hmm. So if you go talk to Gensler and the Securities Exchange Commission, they believe the latter. Everything's a security, and okay, Bitcoin's not, but all right, well, we'll give them that, but everything else is security. And you go talk to CFTC and they say everything's a commodity, and there's maybe a security here and there, but I tend to agree with the CFTC more, because I think it's just more reasonable. Like, who files for gold? Who files for silver? Come on, it's nuts. And you can certainly securitize a commodity, and it's done all the time. But to say something is a security by default, especially if it's not even clear who would file for it or who would be accountable for it, and it's totally decentralized, then there's a problem with the way that your laws are. So this is what's being discussed right now, real time, by policymakers across the United States, both in the executive branch and the legislative branch, and actually even through judicial action about what people can do. And very quickly, I think it's going to converge to something. The question is there enough political capital to actually pass a law? Or is it going to be the case that regulators just basically push as hard as they can without a legislative mandate, and they just invent new laws out of thin air? And we just don't know. It's if you asked me 2 weeks ago before Luna collapsed, I'd say that I don't think anything is going to get done until the change of the administration. But because the Republicans take over, and at the end of the year, they're probably going to shut the whole government down for 2 years until the 2024 election. And if the Republicans win, then there'll be a new administration to clean this up. But now that this crisis has happened, there could be an acceleration in getting something passed. But I don't think in a bipartisan way anything can pass that's very significant. It's going to probably be very targeted and very specific, and ubiquitously agreed that there's a problem there, probably on stable coins.
And do you think the Biden crypto executive order could help push a lot of this through, given that it's a call to action to all the agencies and the regulators to come together and to figure this out?
Yeah, there's about 90 days left on that clock, and probably some of the agencies will be late, even though they're trying best effort to be where they need to be. I'm a little pessimistic and cynical. This particular administration it's not a very well put together administration. There's a lot of contradictions and bias and just straight up lies that they tell from time to time. I mean, if you just look at their alternative energy policy, they're like, we need to move to a post-carbon world. And then so they hold a big battery powered car summit and they don't invite Tesla.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like stuff like this comes up, and every particular industry vertical has been impacted in some way, and crypto's no different in that respect. So yeah, there's an executive order and there's a spectrum of opinions, and they will all come but they'll do this and see where the wind is blowing, and then they'll probably just go with that particular direction and ride it. And so I'm not very optimistic about the executive order. It's good that people are having the conversation, but there's been no meaningful way for us to engage. There's really been no meaningful way for the industry to engage. And we're just still in a situation where they're telling us, instead of collaborating and cooperating with us, for a $2 trillion industry that mostly is American, that if we overregulate, we'll be destroyed and those jobs will go overseas. So we always hope for good things. We hope for good news, but so far we haven't really seen a lot of good news out of the way things have been going there. I mean, they passed the infrastructure bill, for example, and that horrible provision was in, and nobody cared to remove it.
Now we know the SEC and Gary Gensler, they've been very aggressive, and we haven't had an updated how we test and so forth. Have they come, talking to you guys, knocking on your door, essentially saying, hey, we want to take a look at whatever it may be?
No. We've never received any communication ever in the project's history from the SEC. When the eToro delisting happened, everybody came and said, oh my God, they must be next on the list. But why would they? I mean, the facts and circumstances are clear. Cardano is among one of the most decentralized projects around. And even if you had a hard on to go after cryptocurrencies, there's significantly worse offenders like the Lunas of the world and so forth, that there's just so much nepotism and corruption and side dealing and these things and massive pre-mines and, people making backroom deals and so forth. I mean, Cardano is not a very sexy cryptocurrency from that perspective. It's been very open, transparent, and, we just told everybody everything in the beginning, and, the ecosystem's been running without incident. And it's a very decentralized ecosystem. There's 3.5 million people. There's over 900 projects building on Cardano, 3,000 stake pool operators. I could go on vacation and it doesn't really do anything to Cardano. Like, for example, I was just in the Middle East for 10 days. I was in Dubai and Jordan and Israel and out in the deserts. And did anybody notice? No, because it's decentralized. So the SEC, I think, has bigger concerns. I mean, the NFT space in particular, there's tons of probably breaches of security law there with the fractionalization of NFTs. There's tons of stuff involving, like, I'm not going to name names, but there are a lot of Silicon Valley tokens that did things in a very shady way. And they've made themselves millions, if not billions of dollars off the back of retail investors. So it's, I think there's a priority queue of these types of things. And, certainly they're in front of that queue, but who the hell knows? It's, these markets are crazy and regulators are crazy. And until a law is passed that provides clarity, everything is just this, wherever the wind blows, and you have no idea, what it's going to be when you wake up. So all we can do is just say, all right, it is what it is, and just build. There's 15 development companies working on Cardano. We've written more than 1 million lines of code. If you go to Cardano Update, we're #1 for GitHub commits, and you can see it there. There's Fossil hard fork coming out June 29th, and we keep telling people what it's used for. It's very useful for RealFi. We're over 4 million assets have been issued on, for mostly NFTs. On Cardano. The DEXs are finally here, and the next wave will be stable coins and oracles and all kinds of things post-Vossel, and then more will come. There's a lot of governance innovations. Catalyst is now 9 funding rounds in, and it's the largest decentralized organization in the world. So when you look at these facts and circumstances, those are the things I wake up and think about, not some hypothetical boogeyman that could come and cause problems. I mean, if they do, they do. You deal with it. But unless and until that comes, all you can do is you just focus on the work and you focus on building, and then you hope for more reasonable people to come that you can actually have a dialogue with, and you can actually collaborate with and work with. There's plenty of great regulatory advancements that can be done. This is one of the biggest and best reg tech innovations, crypto, ever, because you can automate KYC and AML. You can embed in transactions, metadata, and identity. You can do all kinds of things. Contingent settlement, for example. The settlement is compliance. These types of things. You can guarantee transparency with certain things, especially the flow of funds. Real-time continuous auditing. You no longer need an external auditor. Everybody can see the books. Okay, so if we had a real dialogue, we could talk about how do we build things in a way where everybody's happy, as opposed to an adversarial dialogue where you have to like hire an augur to tell you when the barbarians are going to come and raid your city.
Right. You mentioned decentralized exchanges. I did want to ask you about the Wingriders decentralized exchange. I think it's bringing stable coins liquidity to Cardano. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I like the Wingriders team a lot. We talked to a lot of the different dexes because they had to kind of figure out how do you port something from a mindset of an accounts model to the extended UTXO model. It's a great model, but it does require translation, and it's quite hard in certain respects to wrap your mind around it. It's kind of like when you go from a Java programmer to a functional programmer. You start falling in love with functional programming, but there's kind of this translation time where you have to get used to these new paradigms. You're like, wait, I can't change the variables. How do I program anything? This is crazy. So Wingriders is the most advanced at the moment of the DEXs that are hitting the market. And they've really spent a lot of time and effort into building a great product. And the team's pedigree is impeccable. It's Vacuum Labs, and they were the ones who did the Ledger integration and Trezor integration for Cardano. They created the Ada Light wallet and so forth. So they've kind of been around for a long time. And we've worked with that team a lot on these different integrations. And we came to respect their technical acumen and just how they think and how they work. So we got pretty excited when we heard that they're getting into that market, building a DEX, and that's launching, and it's just one of many, from MinSwap to Sunday. And people have a lot of options now on Cardano, and usually settlement time is under a minute for all the DEXs that are here. And, there's tons of asset pairs that are trading, and there's good liquidity inside these things. So this is what you look for. And, it'll take probably another 6 months to a year for everything to completely stabilize and for winners and losers to be selected, wallet integrations to be done, and these types of things. But it's very encouraging overall to see the levels of advancement. Sunday feels like a lifetime ago, but that was really only 6 months, and now we're in a situation where you have something that's like an order of magnitude better entering market. But, Sunday's going to upgrade, and the rest of these guys are going to upgrade as well. And then so there's this Darwinianism to the DEX space, and they're forced to either get better or die. And every one of these teams are writing a lot of code. They're building very quickly. And they're all pretty excited about the updates that are coming in June. We have SIP 31, 32, 33, and SIP 40 coming. And reference scripts and inputs and data, these types of things are going to really improve the scalability situation and just make it easier to write maintainable software in this respect. So I think that's going to be pretty exciting as well.
So there's a bunch of other updates that I certainly want to get your thoughts on. One of the community questions was the ERC20 converter tool, allowing the migration of Ethereum-based tokens to Cardano. Any updates on when that may be going live? Well,
it already worked. I think Singularity Net used it. I'll have to get an update on it, but my understanding was they were the first user, and they've already successfully used it for a migration. And I just don't know if that migration was done to Milkomina or the migration was done to the Cardano mainnet. So I'll have to take a look and circle back. Gensock, I'll circle back for you.
Awesome.
But it's I know it worked on the test net, but I think it was used on the mainnet for that. And if that's the case, I think that's open software, so other people can use it.
Very exciting. And the other recent news was Wanchain and collaborating to help enable interoperability between Cardano's mainnet and side chains. Can you tell us about that? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, they're just one of many partners that are coming in. And these inter-blockchain partnerships are a lot of fun, especially on interoperability. So our chief product officer, Danal Patel, he used to have a relationship with Wanchain. And so he kind of kept those relationships fresh. And basically, it's just part of a broader conversation of how do you move assets, information, and users between chains. Mm-hmm. And those chains can either be foreign chains. So in this case, Wanchain or Ethereum or Bitcoin, or they could be captive chains like side chains that are connected to the system. In both cases, you need open protocols and bridges to do that. And they're just part of that partnership ecosystem as we start converging the standards. What we want to make sure we do is, especially when you talk about bridges that allow you to move value, that they're very, very, very secure and they're well designed. Because if you look at the $10.5 billion worth of hacks that occurred last year in the DeFi space, a lot of those hacks in the crypto space, DeFi space, were bridges at the end of the rainbow.
Yep.
Thorchain and all this other stuff. That was the failure point. So it's super important that you build kind of a multi-actor ecosystem to kind of work through these things and think about how do you secure it, not just on the Cardano side, but then on the other side, which is usually EVM and Solidity. And so they're kind of part of that story.
Another community question here is if there's any plans on your end to be in line with the ISO 20022's payment standards that's currently being adopted. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a priority. So ISO 20022 is part of the open banking initiatives. And there's a lot of mandates on the Swift side and other places for some notion of interoperability over the next 5-10 years. Now, I think there's over 60 different things you have to do for full ISO 20022, and a lot of those are not connected to the types of stuff that we do in the cryptocurrency space. But it's just a metadata standard. I think it uses XML, but I'll have to take a look at the specifics there. But we have a working group that's looking into that, and it's going to be a lot like what we did when we did Rosetta integration for Coinbase. So a team will come in and they'll build a library or some collection of tools, and then it just becomes something wallets and other pieces of infrastructure can use. And generally speaking, this usually has to do with communication and interexchange. So something comes from the legacy world, like an ATM, to us and back. There needs to be a format that they need to be in, and there has to be some sort of data description that occurs. And there's plenty of different protocols that exist a long time inside the financial world, like Fix is one, and so forth. And so this is just another of an emerging thing. And it's what's nice about it is it's part of the kind of the open banking initiative, which is saying, can we create standard interfaces so banks can better talk to each other and move information, customers, and value quickly. So we will definitely do that. Sharia compliance is the other one that we're looking into, and just takes time and people. So probably another ATIX project, and you throw a few people at it and they build out some stuff and get it done. Now, in practice, will it have a dramatic impact? Yeah, yes and no, because it just says you can talk to something, but it doesn't then translate to an actual product. And generally, if you're talking about a bank integration, there's also a regulatory stack, a compliance stack. There's a lot of proprietary metadata and other things that have to be hooked in. So this might be useful for small scale things like ATM integration, but I don't imagine it's going to be terribly useful for the short term for big financial institutions.
So speaking of banks, central banks around the globe are building their CBDCs. I'm curious if you folks have been approached by any central banks about launching a CBDC potentially on Cardano.
So we've had several discussions with nation states. Like we went to El Salvador and talked to them. We talked to Singapore. We talked to others about everything from Bitcoin-derived monetary systems to full fiat-style CBDCs, where you digitize things. I'm not a fan of fiat CBDCs. I think it's just taking the problems of central banking and turning them up, putting them on steroids. So I don't like that approach. But I do think that there's definitely a great space of combining for a bi-monetary system where you have a nice reserve currency like Bitcoin as a store of value, and then you have a means of exchange unit of account currency that's used for daily transactions. So you use the Bitcoin to create an algorithmic stable coin that basically tracks, something like the dollar or a basket of currencies. And there's some predictability to the value in that. As long as you over collateralize, you're okay. The problem is it's too expensive at the moment to create those types of things. But we have been kind of having different discussions, and it's getting very exciting. A Central African Republic just adopted Bitcoin, and 44 central banks are descending upon El Salvador to talk to Bukele and his people about their Bitcoin experience. So we probably will see several more nation states adopt Bitcoin at some point as a sovereign currency. Now, if that trend continues, there's definitely a marketplace to turn that into a useful currency. And these are the kinds of things that we're excited about as a firm. less so on the CBDC side of things, because basically you're just making existing problems much worse. We're happy to talk to them, talk to them
Sure.
about standards, interoperability. We're happy to talk about automation of compliance. There's all kinds of cool things you can talk to. Consumer protections are another. But the problem is that usually when you look at the proposals and implementations, you're talking about building systems that can be very discriminatory. They can say, well, we don't like your gender or your ethnicity or the tribe you come from, so we're just going to like take 50% of your money away. So you wake up, you open your wallet, and half your balance is gone. Or this group over here, we're going to give them preferential treatment, so they get a 30% discount on everything that they buy. The merchant just has to accept that. These types of things. You can do that with a CBDC. It's a lot harder to do that with cash. Right. So I get very scared when I see, because usually no one also talks about what regulation and constraints are required on the government side. In the United States, we have the Constitution, and it constrains and controls the government in that respect. But there's no constitution right now for this type of monetary policy. And if you leave them to their own devices, they'll go print $30 trillion and pretend like it doesn't cause inflation and then blame everybody else when it does. So I can't really get my hands around trusting these people in that respect. And I think giving them more power is a very bad idea in practice.
So I'm totally in agreement with you. And I've spoken to members of Congress and even Chris Giancarlo, the Digital Dollar Project, about how do we maintain the constitutional rights, right? The right to privacy and so forth with a digital dollar. So with that said, Charles, I know how you personally feel, but if, let's say, the United States comes knocking at your door saying, hey, we want to test and pilot a CBDC on Cardano, would you guys say, no, thank you?
Well, I don't control what's deployed on Cardano. So
Sure.
If I said no, somebody would definitely say yes and be very excited about it. I mean, the central bank of the Federal Reserve of Boston is working with MIT, and they actually are doing a CBDC pilot. So there's certainly some progress on the U.S. side, and there's definitely conversations about digital dollar. I don't think we'd be in the running for something like that, and I don't think private industry is going to get much involved in it. If it did happen, it likely would happen with a large tech company like a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Facebook, not a small bespoke crypto firm like IO or Consensus. But who knows? We would certainly have the conversation. But the first question I would have is, what protections does the consumer have? I can write them on Cardano if they want a Cardano-based, digital dollar. We could certainly write a bunch of smart contracts and preserve your rights and your private. But maybe the government wouldn't be so happy about that. I'm also a Ron Paul guy, so the first thing that I would do is I would force a deflationary monetary policy on the Fed, and I don't think they'd like that either. So I don't think we're in the running anytime soon. It's just the way I do things at my company are fundamentally incompatible with that kind of a project. That said, Cardano's bigger than us, and so certainly people could use it. And I imagine Cardano-like technology would eventually be used in CBDCs, because the way we design things, especially towards the end of this year and throughout next year, it's going to become abundantly clear that this is the platform for payments. Hydra and all these other things, you're going to get tons of TPS, lots of capacity for micropayments. And then the extended UTXO model is very good about porting value and transactions on and off chain dynamically. So going from a permissionless to a permission system and back, going to a centralized database and back, it's very easy to do that in these types of systems. And so Cardano-like technology is probably the way to go if you want to build a CBDC and embed metadata and identity and contingent settlement and other things into transactions. So it wouldn't surprise me if a fork of Cardano or something like it, or concepts from Cardano, work their way into the digital dollar over the next 5 years.
Now, the last time we spoke, we had discussed the new partnerships with Dish and Boost Mobile. Yeah. I'm sure you guys are heads down building and doing your things, but any updates that you can share there?
Yeah, progress is pretty good. It's broken into 3 phases, and we're just kind of finishing up the first phase. And they're running on their side, I think, Cardano nodes. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say and not say, so I'll just kind of leave it at progress is very good, and it's been fun working with the Dish people. they're a very competent organization and they have great engineers. And so whenever you have great engineers and a good competent organization, they ask phenomenal questions. And there's a lot of learning on both sides. And it's the first time we've ever done a deal like this, and they've ever done a deal like this. And so the first phase is always the hardest in that respect, because you have to kind of get into a good workflow. But they've been having some great progress. And I think if they invest correctly and they build correctly, it's going to be ultimately a huge competitive advantage as Dish becomes the fourth carrier. As Sprint has been removed and merged with T-Mobile, there's only three real carriers in the United States: T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. So Dish is trying to come in and be that fourth carrier, and they're building out this massive 5G network. And it's a very advanced network. It runs an Open RAN. It's virtualized. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with software-defined networking with what they have. So it's a perfect solution to combine with blockchain technology, especially on the identity side. And then you can start doing things like really having serious conversations about SIM boosting. You have serious conversations about better ways of authenticating users. You can have serious conversations about commerce, especially remittance transactions and these types of things, which are very important for the Boost Mobile portfolio. So it's a long relationship in that respect. And, we're here to kind of work with them as they emerge through that. And a lot of things that we integrate are open standards like DIDs and so forth. So they're ubiquitous in that respect. And it's really fun and exciting to kind of see where these things go.
The next item I have to ask you about, I was very intrigued by it, and that is Snoop Dogg. How are you guys working together? And I remember you guys doing a Twitter Spaces together as well.
Okay, so Josh Miller, he's my old secretary. He now runs our NFT side. He calls me up and he's like, "Hey, do you want to be in a Twitter space with Snoop Dogg?" And I'm like, "Dude, I am the whitest person alive. I don't know how that works." And he's like, No, it'll be awesome. It'll be okay. So I said, "This sounds fun." And apparently his son Champ is a big fan of Cardano and has done some great projects on Cardano. And so we talked back and forth for a little bit, and we just found a time. I was actually flying when I did that Twitter space, so we did that on a plane. So that was a little interesting, but we got it done. And I'm just sitting there talking to Snoop Dogg and some other guys who are OGs in the rap community, and it was a very surreal moment, for me. And I was just sitting here saying, like, 10 years ago, if you came to me and told me that this is how my life would end up and these are the things that I'm doing, I'd be like, "You're fucking nuts." But it just shows you the diversity and the size of the cryptocurrency community, in particular the Cardano community, and just how it attracts great people to go and do things. And he has particular problems that he's concerned about and he wants to get solved that are a direct consequence of the things he went through as an early musician. And his son is a very innovative kid who's really excited to kind of make his own way and build his own things. So they're a perfect team in that respect. And there's a lot of wisdom in how they've been rolling things out. And they seem to have this ability to kind of try new things and fail quickly and build quickly and see what works and what doesn't work. So it's really fun having them around. And I think it's going to attract a lot of other musicians and a lot of other creatives and artists, especially younger ones who haven't quite made it yet, to come in and do something interesting in Cardano. And that really gets me excited. If we can come up with better non-predatory business models in the music industry to help young artists. I mean, just look at all the bad stuff that happened. Prince, there's a reason why they called him the artist formerly known as Prince. Or Kesha, I guess she doesn't own any of her music or these types of things. It's super common for this type of stuff to happen. So it's not just issues in, let's say, the rap market. It's across the board in the music industry. It's very predatory. And you get these kids who are very talented, but they don't have a lot of business sense because they're young and they've never built anything. And these guys come in and they take terrible advantage of them. So if you can rebuild your distribution, rebuild the way you handle rights management, rebuild the relationship that you have with your fan, where that becomes an asset of the artist, that's a very powerful thing that I think is going to help people, kind of not suffer the same sins of the past. So it's real exciting from that perspective, and it's exciting to see Snoop inside the space. And we'll cross paths from time to time. I think I maybe Mike Tyson will come. Who else knows? it's like at this point, if Josh called me up and be like, "Hey, you want to do something with Obama?" I was like, "All right, I guess we're doing it." It's pretty amazing to see the diversity of things, and so I'm not surprised anymore when I get that phone call from him.
You brought up some interesting points there, and some of the emerging artists and being able to take control of their rights and their content and the creativity. Do you think this Web3 blockchain tokenization digital ownership movement will spark some sort of renaissance, and maybe we'll see things we've never seen before in the years to
Well,
come?
it's the perfect companion of the metaverse concept, and the metaverse is coming. You always look at where's the hardware at, where's the software at, where are consumers at, and the consumers are where they need to be. The software is very good, and the hardware is going to be exceedingly good within 2 years. Next year, more likely than not, depending on the markets and chip availability, very good probability that Apple is going to release their VR AR headset, and they have like 5,000 engineers working on it. I guess they have something called a Reality OS or whatever it is. And it's like the worst kept secret in Silicon Valley that Apple's entering this world. The thing is that when a player that big with those kinds of capabilities enters the space, then it creates a sea change, just like the iPhone did. And then suddenly everybody to imitate it gets equivalent capabilities, and you wake up in 5 years and you have these just extraordinary, incredible devices that do so much. That will create a VR AR revolution that really is a gateway into this concept of a metaverse. The problem with metaverse is they don't have a notion of scarcity. The web does. You have domain names and these things. There's only one Microsoft.com, and people who realized that early on, they went land shopping, and they're selling domain names for like $50 million, $100 million.
That
It's
was
pretty
me.
crazy. Yeah, and they're making great money. Well, similarly, spatial scarcity is what NFTs give you. So you can basically take coordinates or a location or property and say, okay, well, this thing is represented by this token, and it's the deed for it, and there's only one copy of that. So yeah, you could technically create more, but the metaverse only has one, and therefore it's scarce. Technically, you could have another Microsoft.com, but you need a different domain name system, right? And so it's the same notion here. So I think that Web3 can play a huge role there, but there are huge problems that Web3 still hasn't addressed. Decentralized storage, decentralized compute, decentralized network. These things are in their infancy. And so a lot of cases, they're falling back on Web2 style solutions with Infura and Alchemy and, these other platforms. And so, yeah, you're saying it's Web3, but the reality is like 5 companies basically control your experience, your access, and in many cases, whether it works or not. So given all of that, you're like, all right, we're not really there yet. So I think the protocols on our side need probably another 5 to 10 years to evolve to a point where they're truly decentralized, yet scalable and economically compatible. Everybody's moving in that direction. There's a lot of great ventures that are building these things and thinking about these things, but we're just not there yet. Now, the metaverse is also going to probably take 5 or 10 years. And so I think those two are going to kind of collide, and it's going to get your peanut butter and your jelly, and then you're going to have a really good sandwich. It's going to be a pretty good, delicious mixture, but it's going to be a little rough right now as they're separate.
Now, recently, Vitalik Buterin shared some thoughts on Twitter, and I saw you replied, kind of pitching him to come join Cardano. Were you just being a bit funny, tongue in cheek, or were you serious?
Well, it's kind of funny. I don't have any issues with Vitalik. Yeah, I think people like hyping the hell out of the Vitalik versus Charles thing, and there's certainly been books that have been written and really horrible things that have been said. But that's by people who aren't Vitalik and Charles. Publicly, we've always maintained a certain level of, I'd like to believe, respect. I certainly got very harsh during the Ethereum Classic days when that incident first broke out, because I felt that there was a violation of a social contract upon which Ethereum was founded, that I was a member of. But that's aside, we really haven't had any fights. I mean, I see him every now and then. I run into Vitalik probably once a year, and I say, "Hey," he says, "Hey." It's like 20 seconds, and we move on. I don't think he thinks very highly of me, intellectually or otherwise. but it is what it is. And I don't believe that he thinks very highly of Cardano, given the fact that he doesn't mention it. And it's like the forbidden thing. Cardano's never brought up. That's to the detriment, I think, of his ecosystem and his community, not to ours. And a lot of the things that he muses about were problems that we were thinking about in 2015 and 2016. And we have evidence of this because read Why Cardano. I wrote it myself and we publicly released it in 2016. I was kind of talking about a lot of the same things that he was talking about. And when I outlined the three things for a third generation cryptocurrency, scalability, sustainability, and governance, that governance piece is exactly what he's talking about. And my belief is you really need a blockchain-based system to do these things, or else you end up having appeal to a central authority to get things done, or total anarchy in the case of Bitcoin, where nothing really gets done and you kind of stay in a stable state. And if you're not the first mover, that's problematic. But, he's a young guy, and he's surrounded by very brilliant people, and he's surrounded by a lot of money and power. So he's just going to do what he wants to do. It's a shame everything worked out the way it did, because we actually have a lot of common interests. He's interested in anti-aging. I own a biotech company that does anti-aging, and we have great people we work with on that. We write phenomenal papers that actually, if he took the time to understand and read, I think he'd be very inspired from and learn a lot from. He doesn't seem to care. There's a lot of cool stuff in sustainability that I do in agriculture and hydroponics and so forth that I imagine that he'd probably be pretty interested in. But, you can't win them all. And it's water under the bridge. It's the past is the past. And I haven't really thought too much about Ethereum Foundation or the Ethereum days since I left in 2014. And the only reason we keep talking about it is for two reasons. One, the media just really wants to refer to me as one of the founders of Ethereum. And for some bizarre reason, the Ethereum community thinks I'm the guy who pushes that. I actually got to a point where I said, I won't take interviews if you refer to me as the Ethereum founder.
It's a good thing I didn't mention that, huh?
I know, right? I really appreciate that, because I was only there for 6 months, and I'd like to believe they were meaningful months, but it is what it is. And then the other thing is that people keep bringing up the past. I guess there's an Ethereum movie that's now coming out in 2023, 2024. And I guess I'm going to be the villain of the movie. And it's going to be just a hatchet job. So that's really frustrating. Spend 6 months, 10 years ago at some place, and then have the rest of your life and all your accomplishments and all the things you've done ignored, and then create these bizarre incentives to try to provoke a rivalry amongst people that have no problem with each other. I have no problem with Joe Lubin or Gavin Wood or Vitalik Buterin. Or if you see them, I say, hey. They say, hey. It's cordial. It's friendly. Will we collaborate? Probably not. If there is mutual interest, would we do something about it? Maybe. It depends on the facts and circumstances. But there's no viciousness or anything like that. Then you go into Reddit, you go into these other channels, and they act like it's a holy war. And they say just bizarre, crazy things, that just don't make any sense. But, welcome to being a public figure. It is what it is. The old saying is the dog barks, but the caravan moves on.
Sure. And do you think part of it, I know you had shared some thoughts about this with crypto media and VCs, right? If someone takes a bet on something and there is another project that's competing against it and threatens it from a market share standpoint, which I think obviously Cardano does, Ethereum, that they automatically, okay, we need to paint Cardano or whatever project in a bad light. You think there's some of that in there?
Well, 20 guys told me. Good old Mike Novogratz. There's plenty of that too. There's a lot of VC controlled or influenced media in this space. I mean, it's almost comical when we get left out of a Masari report or A16Z writes something and they don't include Cardano in their entire PowerPoint when they say the state of cryptocurrency. We're the number 3 platform for volume and issuance and transactions with NFTs. Some of the statements made too, like 1 transaction per block. Is that we have no dApps, there's no smart contracts running, it's totally centralized. It's like, these are just provably wrong statements. And if they're made by shit posters on Twitter, you'd be like, it's Twitter. They're being made by VCs. These being made by like credible journalists. And so you're saying, this is weird. So there's a little bit of that, but it is what it is. Everybody always complains about the media,
Sure.
Yeah. So, go make your own and go make your own news and stop trying to get people to love you and just start building. A time ago, I took a step back and I realized that I'm not going to be loved in the cryptocurrency space. Okay. It's not going to happen. There are elements of people, they think I'm a fraud, a pathological liar, a sociopath. Everything about me is evil and wrong. And I've accomplished nothing. And I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't know how Cardano exists, or I built a 600-person company, or we have 140 papers. All of that's made up. Doesn't exist. That's what they think. So you can't convince those people. You can't get those people to love you. But you go into politics. If you're a Republican, the Democrats believe you're Satan incarnate. If you're a Democrat, the Republicans believe you're Satan incarnate. There's no common ground there because there's an incentive for politics of personal destruction.
Right.
So what you have to do is you have to take a step back and you have to say, look, the only thing I can do is get it done. Go work, go build, these types of things, and find mutual and common interests amongst people. And so you run into some people, and some of the people we work with are firms that do most of their business in the Ethereum space. Look at Certic. Like 95% of their business is Ethereum related projects or EVM related projects. And we come to them and they're out of Yale, and we say, hey, come to our certification summit, work with us and help write standards for smart contract certification. Sure. Let's collaborate. These types of things. We brought such a diverse group of people into the Cardano ecosystem because it needed to get done. So what I worry about, what I think about is what is today? What do we have to get done today? What do we have to build? What do we have to ship? So it's Vossel. Let's get that done. Next, input endorsers and a lot of backlog stuff like Genesis and peer-to-peer that, it's working its way through the pipeline. A lot of things like improve the developer experience, make sure that the sidechains ecosystem comes out, get Mithril done, get Hydra done, these types of things. That's what I care about. Let the work stand on its own 2 feet. And also the next level of care is the community. There's 3 million of them. They matter. So going to go to Consensus and have a big community event the day before. Make sure it's fun and exciting, and people really enjoy it. And they have good time with it, and also show people everything that's been accomplished. And then, make sure facts get out there. So do interviews, talk to people, these types of things. If you're not getting fair media, go make your own media. People forget I have 1 million Twitter followers.
Right.
I can go and tweet something. I can go and use StreamYard, and, it can be a thank you video, or it's showing people a weird book, or it can be talking about a tense regulatory situation or something like that. I can go any part of that spectrum. Okay. And so go make your own media and just make sure that people are informed, but don't let yourself be defined by others, and don't let yourself be silenced by others. And we've always been able to, somehow claw and scratch and get our own, regardless of what's come our way.
Well, Charles, I have to say, I absolutely appreciate your AMAs and your live streams that you do, because like you said, you're putting out the facts and despite what other people are saying, and we're hearing it directly from the horse's mouth. So certainly appreciate those updates that you provide. Some questions from the community.
Sure.
One being, what's your favorite blockchain outside of Cardano, or blockchains, if there's multiple ones?
Well, I really like Ergo. It's a kind of a spiritual successor in my view for Bitcoin, and they kind of did all the things that you should have done with Bitcoin. So that's a beautiful ecosystem, and it's well put together. I'm a big fan of Zcash as well. I know Zuko, and from time to time we have lunch. He lives in Boulder as well, so he's not too far from me. And Zuko he's led a great ecosystem, and with the recent upgrade, they kind of modernized Zcash. They brought in Fly Client and Halo and all kinds of really cool ideas. So that's exciting. Big fan of that work. There's some other things that are interesting, not from a distribution viewpoint, but interesting just because it's a new class of technology. You don't see that very often. So things like Mina and Cello, not saying anything about the economics of that or the people involved, but just looking at the tech, in particular with Cello with Plumo, that's really interesting stuff because it's a constant size blockchain. So you're talking about something that really is consumer friendly and a preservation of inclusive accountability. So that's interesting. I've been in the space so long that I remember all the old things. For example, Purecoin was really cool. It was proof of stake, proof of work coin, but it has been around since like 2011. Nobody's cared about it. But hey, remember Feathercoin? That was pretty cool back in the day too. We wrote Minotaur actually inspired from that concept of a hybrid consensus algorithm of how do you combine proof of work and proof of stake together. So we have a new protocol that's coming out for that. And hopefully that paper will be at CCS. Those are a few that I really enjoy, just looking at, thinking about, cogitating over. IOTA is going to probably go through a major upgrade here. They just published 2 really cool papers that I've been looking through that kind of solve some of the problems that Tangle had. And should they be able to implement these things, it actually may allow them to finally start realizing what they wanted to do when that ecosystem came out. And having an ecosystem that it really has applications in IoT and these other things, that's pretty exciting. So, that's great. But, all of these projects, they always comes with, ups and downs. And the minute you talk about them, then if you don't talk about them the right way or use the right phrases, or if you even give a light criticism, then the fanboys crawl out and they attack you. Like, for example, I really admire that Tezos kind of grew up with us and they did decentralized governance and formal methods and functional programming as well. We are hated by a lot in the Tezos community. They say Cardano is an MLM Ponzi scheme, that's a gamble coin, and we stole everything from Tezos. And only after reading the Tezos white paper did we in any way, shape, or form, get inspired to do the things that they did. Meanwhile, like a lot of influence in the Tezos white paper came from Alex Chirpinoy, who actually worked for me before he went and created Ergo. So, it's like, if you're going to play the game with a guy who's been in the space since 2011 about who was first to publish, come on, guys. And they said, no, you were a casino coin because there was some Japanese thing we saw from 2015. Obviously, Charles, you must have written it because you speak Japanese. No, I don't. Come on, guys.
Theories.
Yeah, I know it's like conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, it's like they're working with Nomadic Labs and INRIA and these other things. And there's some really good people in those circles. Like, I'm a big fan of Xavier Leroy, the Gallium group and the work that they did with CompCert. So it's just a shame that these things come into play. And this is, I think, the big sin of the industry, where people who ought to be working together for ego or toxic communities or some bizarre reason don't work together. And that ends up creating a lot of problems in the end that shouldn't exist. We should be much more collaborative. And if we could set our egos aside, I think we could get a lot more done.
So Charles, there's a question I want to ask you, and you may not be able to speak to it, but there was a question from the community, and that is, have you been following the Ripple lawsuit situation? And if you have any thoughts on the SEC giving Ethereum, the non-security title, so to speak, back in 2018, if you had any thoughts to share there.
Well, I had dinner with Brad Garlinghouse when I was at the Milken Institute, and we did have a slight discussion here. Of course, he couldn't go into details because it's ongoing litigation. But, the whole industry is watching this case very closely, because if Ripple was to lose, the consensus opinion is that the Securities Exchange Commission would become significantly more aggressive with layer ones and basically devastate innovation in our industry. I mean, Gensler is not asking for reasonable things. When he says, come in and register, it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Honestly, how does gold register? He said, oh, this is different than gold. And materially, tell me how. If the people who built it disappear and the businesses that are bootstrapped it go out of business and the thing is still around, this is obviously a little different than a security. And so you can argue that perhaps in a period of time in the thing's life that it had security-like properties and that there should be disclosures and transparency and restricted trading. But at some point, it becomes sufficiently decentralized. And at that point, it's really too hard to go and mandate arbitrarily Bob over there is responsible for it forever, even though he may have nothing to do with it anymore. So that was really the point of the Hinman speech of saying there's this threshold that you cross, and Maybe Ethereum was problematic in the beginning, but it's gotten to a point where it's crossed that threshold, and it's like Bitcoin in that respect. And there have been rulings with settlements with the SEC where they seem to actually agree with that. For example, the EOS, they went after Block One and they said, hey, you got to pay a fine for the way that you distributed your token. They paid 24 million. But notice that EOS still has liquidity. Why didn't the SEC say, well, EOS is still a security and go after them? They're kind of implicitly in that fine said that EOS was a security and it's not a security anymore. Otherwise, they had an obligation to remove all liquidity from that product and, and issue a right of rescission. So I think from a meta viewpoint, it's a very important case, and I really hope that it gets resolved correctly. And I do feel for the pain that these things cause. In Switzerland, when we did the Ethereum ICO, we went and talked to the Swiss government. And within 3 weeks, everything was resolved. And they stamped something, and that was the law of the land for us. And that's it. At least from a tax perspective. There were some things with FINMA that had to be sorted out after I left. But from a tax perspective, it was fine. I can't do that in America. You can't go and get, like a haggle and negotiate and say, okay, how are we going to do this? They say, oh, come and talk to us. Well, it's one-way conversation. You talk to them, they don't talk back. And they don't give you a document at the end of the conversation saying, as long as you follow these things, you're okay. They say it's a no action letter. Well, then point to the no action letters that have been issued for reasonable layer ones. Yes, there's some people who are, well, if we completely offshore this and we do this and this and this, and it's a pyrrhic no action, but there's been no actions issued for any reasonable layer one, nor would it be issued. Come on, let's be adults here in this respect. So frankly, what needs to happen is they just need to take a chill out and say, let's get some basic principles. And I hope through this effort with the Biden administration, they can outline them, but some basic understandings about software quality, consumer protections, and a litany of other things need to be written down. And then what you do is you say, okay, how do we influence policy and enforcement in a way to ensure that? A scam is a scam is a scam is a scam. You don't need securities law for BitConnect or OneCoin or these types of things. It's just fraud.
Yep.
The DOJ can come in and do all these things. You don't need these types of things. If you want disclosures, where is all the craziness happening? It's on the trading side. So put in policies of insider trading restrictions and these types of things or require some transparency there. There's reasonable things you can discuss with industry that I think most people would be on board with. But to say crazy things like, well, they should just all register, and when it's not even clear how to do that, or, and destruction of all the liquidity. And then just think about the people who did try to do things the right way.
Right.
You have, what was it, Blockworks or whatever it was. And they went and they said, hey, we're going to go and do a Reg A or whatever it was. They registered with the SEC. They were only able to raise like $24 million. It cost them like $6 million to raise the money through legal fees and all these other things. The EOS does nothing, and they pay a fine, and they get to keep $4 billion. There's perverse incentives inside this entire setup as well with this regulatory arbitrage. It's nuts. So I think it will get resolved probably this year, maybe next year at the latest. And I believe right now, with the way things are going, XRP is probably going to win the lawsuit. Now that said, it's a Pyrrhic victory usually, because you don't get any of the money back, even if it's dismissed with prejudice. The SEC doesn't have to pay legal fees or anything like that. So the millions and millions and millions of dollars that they've spent defending themselves, they can't recover. And it depending on how things go, they might be in a position where it doesn't influence policy. So there can be three outcomes. They can lose, and it influences policy, and it's used as the bedrock for a fatwa against layer ones. So it's like a really bad situation. They win, but they win in a way that's very specific to certain facts of the Ripple case, in which case it's not useful for the rest of the industry. Or they win big, and actually it curtails the SEC's ability to enforce things in the industry. I think it's probably the middle part. They're going to win on some technicalities, because the judge is probably not going to want to deal with the broader question. And frankly, this should not be something that the judiciary resolves. This should be something that's resolved in law.
Yeah.
The damn Senate, Congress need to step up and actually do their job and pass a comprehensive regulatory reform and clearly articulate the boundaries of things. They've known about this for years. They just haven't gotten it done because of the gridlock in Washington.
Yeah, and I think too, I think Coinbase CEO tweeted about it, that the SEC, even though they're inviting you in to talk, like you said, it's a one-way conversation, but they're taking the information and using it against you instead of trying to work with you. And he tweeted, I think they're acting shady, and that's kind of what happened with their Coinbase lending product.
I've heard that a lot from Brad and from the Coinbase guys and others, and I wasn't there, so I can't take a position one way or the other, but I have heard that a lot from a variety of different people. It is disingenuous to say, hey, let's have a conversation, but you actually have no intent of having a conversation, and everything you say can and will be used against you at some arbitrary point in the future. You're disincentivizing cooperation and collaboration. You're incentivizing offshoring. You're destroying an American industry that is worth $2 trillion. And you're just ultimately hurting the nation. You're not really doing anything for consumer protection. You're not helping anybody there. Right. And don't tell me consumer protection is great when you have GameStop and these other things occur. Yeah. So those are highly regulated marketplaces, yet these things still occur. People are going to do what they want to do with their money. And, really where you should be focused on is making sure claims are factual, making sure transparency is the case, and the mechanisms of market mechanics, like how the trading is done and these other things, are great. That's why I like DEXs so much, because they're fair if they're constructed correctly. There's no insider trading or market manipulation or market making against your customers or these types of things. Everyone, excuse me, has equal access to the system. Whereas that's not necessarily the case with high frequency trading or other things where people co-locate their stuff with the servers of the exchange.
Yeah.
So,
so final question here, because I know we're running up on time. I don't want to keep you longer, but this is a fun one. If the crypto space was Game of Thrones, what character would Cardano be?
That's an interesting one. What character? Well, we've always been the peer-reviewed get things done. So probably Samwise Tarly, the fat guy who's the Meister, something like that. We certainly wouldn't be any of the crazy ones like burn them all or anything like that. But and I didn't get beheaded, so yeah, Sam lived to the end, so we should be okay.
Awesome, Charles. Always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Okay, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Cheers.